Bill Clinton was our president. The Macarena was our most famous dance. We all wanted to catch them all. Backstreet Boys wanted it that way. Britney Spears had done it again. NSYNC was waving bye bye bye. Kevin Conroy was our Batman. Tim Daly was our Superman. Tim Drake wore the Robin R. Bane broke Batman's back. Doomsday killed Superman. Life was like a hurricane in Duckburg. And Darkwing Duck got dangerous. We all wanted to go digital. Ross and Rachel were on and off again. And yes, Steve Urkel did do that. Welcome to 1990's, decade in collectibles. Most likely, if you were a kid from the 90s, these were some of the toys you had. Join me, Rant Robin,
and DigiFoxCat,
as we explore a decade in collectibles, some of the best toys and collectibles that we kept, or might have bought more recently, but they come from the era of about 1990 to maybe just barely after 2000, because we realize if you were a 90s kid, you probably had toys a few years past the 2000s. So join us as we explore some of the best toys we've found in our collection. In the 1990s, we all thought these were going to pay our college tuition someday, so we all rushed to the store and bought many TYs of different sizes and shapes.
We got some that are still worth some, like Scorch here, and the Peace Bear. But most of them aren't worth much. And they also came in different sizes. We had the Buddies, the Beanies, and the Teeny Beanies. And the Teeny Beanies here were the popular Happy Meal toy. We went crazy for these things, begging our parents to take us to McDonald's, whether we liked it or not, because I didn't particularly like McDonald's as a kid, just to get a Teeny Beanie. And we also had something called Buddy pillows or something like that, but they were like pre-Beanie Buddies. Supposed to be like travel pillows.
Yep. And while we all thought that these would gain a lot of value over the years, unfortunately most of them gained almost no value because they were way too mass-produced. And even today you can find them in old stores, and even some of the Toys R Us warehouses still have a few sitting on the rack.
Yeah, we had one open up in one of our malls. That was a Toys R Us outlet, and they had a big basket of them.
Yeah, there's a few that gained value, such as Millennium. Millennium Bear was a bear released to commemorate the 2000s, or the release of 1999 to 2000. And she has, depending on which version of her that you have, gained a lot of value. I believe the largest one and the smallest one have the most value, and the middle one if it's part of the first batch, which I am not completely sure if mine is part of the first batch or not.
We have some other ones, like this was one of the original designs for Mystic, so it's pretty valuable, as is this Derby. We have one of the original designs. So those are pretty expensive, and like I said, Scorch gains value because the dragons were very popular and they couldn't keep enough on the shelves. We also had the official fan club, which gave us trading cards. They also came with stickers. These were stickers here, and you got trading cards and holographic ones, and some of them even say TY artist proof, so the artist who did the original design approved the design of the card. Alright, so we got a little bit of everything with TY, just like almost anything in the 90s. You had the actual thing, you had training cards, yeah, everything.
Yeah, as did a lot of things with the 90s. They thought that they would go everywhere. And again, they just overextended themselves, I think. And we saw a brief, I think they almost seemed to kind of die out for a while until more recently when they brought back the new style of TY Beanie Babies again with the big eyes.
The Beanie Boos.
Yep. But I think for the most part, these beanies that we have here in the trading cards and in the original toy, collectible toys, are probably pretty much a relic of the past.
Yeah.
That's worth almost nothing.
Just like anybody, we could catch them all by the Pokemon trading cards. These are a few relics we have back from Generation 1. This was way back when. We have a few different ones. We even have Promo Pikachu and Mewtwo from the first movie. You got these at the movie theaters when you went to see the movie, not saw the movie. We have a few like the Gym Leader Trainer cards, the Team Rocket set that they had. Unfortunately, I do not still have my Blastoise or my Charizard that I had. Not that my Charizard was first edition. I think it was just holographic. Gyarados up there was very popular. He was in one of the starter decks. And we rushed out to go get these. Booster packs, starter decks, trading them, getting in trouble. This was officially the first band of our childhood of things you couldn't bring to school.
Yeah, and for those of us that went to private or charter schools, it was even worse. Because very often there was believed to be religious implications to them because of the a small nameless Christian organization that I just won't name for the sake of them here decided that the word Pokemon resembled the word in another language that meant demon, and they decided that it must mean that even though the word was not related, it literally just meant pocket monster. So tons of Christians were banned from Pokemon, among other things, for quite a while.
I'm going to show you this one in particular because it's one of the old Topps cards. I don't know if anybody remembers those or we even still have them, but it had information. It had a who's that Pokemon on the back, showed you what first episode it was in and everything. I kept Vulpix because it was one of my favorite ones. And obviously, that was one of the ones that I drew a lot when I was doing this, because I used to have a collection of these, and I would take them with a notebook or just paper and just draw them.
Yep, and we thought there would be a lot of value in these, and you know, unlike some things, there is a lot of values to be found in some of the Pokemon cards, but they're few and far between. You have to have certain first edition Charmander, Charizards, or Blastoises, or main ones, and usually have them holographic or something for it to gain a couple $100 from it.
Yeah, I think in this collection here, I think our most expensive ones would be the Gyarados and the Promo Pikachu and Mewtwo. And another collectible thing, some people would say you were a trader if you collected these. But we have Digimon cards as well. They weren't quite as popular, but they did take off in certain areas. So this was what they looked like in the 90s. We don't have too many of these around. You get them ever so often. There's a couple of the Topps cards that I had.
And it is very important to mention here, for those that don't know, but we've mentioned it before, Digimon did come first in Japan. It was only in the American releases that we saw Pokemon first, but neither of the producers or creators of either one meant to copy the other at all. There were other shows later on that would copy both, but neither of these was a copy of the other one.
I'm going to show you on the Topps cards. I have what's considered first edition, but it's got like a digital preview was what it had on it. It's hard to see. And here's what the backs of the Topps cards for the Digimon looked like. Very similar design. And then this one here was a very peculiar one. It came with one of the Digivolving toys. So this was Garurumon, which was Bergemon's evolution. And here's what the back looks like. So this came with the toy.
Long before the age of trade paperbacks, or at least we didn't have many of them, we all ran to the comic book stores or the rack at our supermarket and bought comic books of all different characters. And if we were lucky, sometimes we even got a movie in comic book form. We had some interesting characters in the 90s, like Spoiler and Tim Drake's Robin.
Holding Spoiler's child.
Yep. Along with cartoon comics like the Animaniacs based on their TV show. And the 90s, what would the 90s be without some exercise ad in the form of a comic book? Verb, it's what you do. Only let's throw in superheroes to make it worthwhile, because that'll get kids to exercise and not play as many video games. And then, of course, you have your Marvel Wolverine. You had your Nick Fury comics, which read a lot like a James Bond.
And you have Elseworlds Tales.
And your Elseworld Tales. And, of course, we had our collector's packages, which to this day, most of them have no value. This is a first edition of the Robin Huntress title in its collector's kit set. We have not had to open it because we were able to get the compilation recently where they finally published this. And of course, we have stamp albums. What kid didn't love collecting stamps in the 90s? And to try to get kids interested in the wonderful world of stamp collecting, we throw your favorite DC superheroes behind it.
I loved this one because I loved what they did. They did backstories and whatnot. They did various characters. My favorite part was Robin. They stuck him with teddy bears, I believe, in this one.
Yep. Which we might be able to find if we flip through it
There
for a
it
bit.
is.
Yep, Robin got stuck with the teddy bears.
Poor Tim Drake. The 90s. Slamming down the Pogs. This would be what a collection of Pogs might have looked like. Actually, this is only about a half of what I probably had. I think I had 2 containers, but this is what survived. We have ones from radio stations, came in toys from restaurants, packs you could get. We even have our slammers. I had a metal slammer that was Disney from The Lion King. It's about 95. Metal versus like my Snoopy one, which is plastic. And our very chewed up container. It has seen better days. It got into a nice fight with one of my dogs.
It's just miraculous to find these things, and again, there is value behind some of the most interesting ones, but like most of the trends of the 90s, we ended up not getting much value behind them, but they are still very cool to look at.
It was also nice to kind of, well, not nice to see, it was interesting to see about 2005, they tried to bring back, revive the Pogs. It did not do well at all.
Nope.
So these really are a relic of the 90s.
Yeah, and they're gonna probably try again someday, but at least for now, they're a relic that's best left probably in the 90s and just a good memory.
Tamagotchis. Although these weren't Tamagotchis, these were the American versions called Gigapets. I couldn't get an actual Tamagotchi, but I got Gigapets. So this was the cat and koala. I believe I also had the dinosaur, but I've lost that over the years. Yep, we all tried to keep them alive for more than a couple of days, even on the Gigapet line in the 90s. And I was one of the high successors in my classmates with it, because I could keep mine alive on average for about a week and a half. That's if I kept it up and didn't let my homework slack on doing so. And also in the 90s, we had everything Lisa Frank if you were a girl. Some of the guys got into it, but it was really a girl thing to get the latest colorful polar bears, dogs, cats, lions, tigers, bears, oh my. I think we had almost everything. It wasn't until about 2000 when Lisa Frank started doing humans. So this was my favorite character, the polar bear. Here's something you might not have thought to find in our collection, but here it is. This is the old game guide for Sonic the Hedgehog 1 and 2 from the 90s. So this would have been Sega Genesis way back when. It's a little beat up because it hasn't survived the years. As you can tell, it no longer has a back cover, but it used to have an ordering sheet where you could order memorabilia from the Sonic, like the game, handheld consoles, t-shirts. And like I said, it's a basic guide to the games. So having this and playing some of the collections like Sonic's Ultimate Sega Collection for the Xbox 360, this is how I got through Sonic and got so good. Okay, here on our shelf we have displays of old Digimon toys that I had growing up. Only a few of these are actually from the actual 90s. That would have been Season 1, which would have been like Omnimon there, Wargreymon, my Digivolving Birdramon, which is in I can't speak their names today. Garujamon, her ultimate form there. And then we got a few from Season 2, like Paludramon, Imperial Dramon, Fighter Mode. A few of the tiny, tiny, tiny little Digimon that they had. I believe this set was from Season 4, which was compared to, Power Rangers, because they transformed into them. Then you had the Rika set, along with Digivolving Cubimon into Talmon, and Renamon into Sakuyamon, as well as Golemon into Gallantmon from Season 3, which was my favorite season, but that would have been into the 2000s. Alright, these are something from my childhood. This was my pig. This was named Snort, because that's all he told me. I was one of those literal kids. And this one is a new one, and this one is Hump. I will show you why I call him Hump. He had a humpback, and it was originally my sister's, but she gave it to me. These were, as you can see, this one we found at a rummage sale, so it was a fun find. These are the Playful Pals from Relic of the Past, Mervyn's. So I had to keep the tag on this one. But they were very soft, very well made, and detailed. They had little hearts on their tags. I was saying my tag on my bear is gone. He's tagless, as were most of my toys. And, yep, the tag's gone on the pig too. But the pig once was pink. It's now a very faded gray pink. And the bear is no longer white. Well, except for like right there. And his nose is also, they had like a fabric covering the nose and the eyes scraped up. So these were well loved. Sad to see the store go out of business and the Playful Pals gone. I believe one Christmas my aunts and grandma got all of us grandkids at least one of these.
If you were a kid of the 90s, chances are you'd probably heard the line in a sharp, nasally voice from a young Jaleel White. Did I do that?
That's no good.
Who later went on to do the voice of Sonic. What's interesting to note about this, as you can tell, it's just wear and tear of life, but it is in relatively good condition. This was a not well known, because most people didn't even know this existed, a doll of Steve Urkel. This is not the talking version for those of you who are well acquainted with the Steve Urkel dolls. This is the non-talking version. We ended up finding it in the swap meet in the back of a thrift store. And we'll turn it around so you can kind of see the detail on it. But yeah, there's a lot of good detail on this. It is very intriguing. This is one of his more traditional outfits, although it is interesting to note that the pants on the talking doll and the non-talking doll were different. The talking had blue jeans, the non-talking had kind of a marble gray blue pair of pants. Plastic shoes at the bottom. And again, this does go for a pretty good value, but the demand for it is not as common as one would expect. We bought it for about 20, probably could turn around and sell it for 30, but again, the demand for it is not super high, so it was more just something that I wanted to have because I was a big lover of Family Matters and would love to see Jaleel White reprise that role again someday. What kid from the 90s didn't have their very own look-alike Cabbage Patch doll? Back when Cabbage Patch dolls were first marketed, kids were told that they could buy one that looked just like them, so parents rushed out before Christmas and birthdays that year to buy their kid the one that had the same hair color, skin color, and eye color.
I never had one because I thought they were creepy. Both my sisters had one, but I never got one.
Yeah, me and my sisters both had our own Cabbage Patch dolls that looked like us at the time. My sister is blonde-haired, blue-eyed. Hers was blonde-haired, blue-eyed. And she also gave the other version, which was a bald baby version, to my younger sister, who was at the time a young baby at the time. But as you can see, these are not like the Cabbage Patch dolls now. They are much better made. But again, this doll received a lot of wear and tear over the years, because he was my, I played that he was my son, and so, you know.
I'll also mention that in the 90s, Cabbage Patch dolls smelled like baby powder, and this one still has a slight baby powder scent to it. That fresh baby powder scent.
Yep.
I was more intrigued by the American dolls that came out in the 90s than the Cabbage Patch doll. I never got one of those either, though.
Then there was the ever-popular 90s toys and action figures based off of the TV shows of the time. Let me make a note right here and say, if you have not seen a 90s action figure, which we can kind of review in a little bit more detail maybe in a bit, they were much better made than any action figure that you have nowadays. Just by the fact that I've had them now for over 20 years, and these are all in good condition. Most of these were played with, other than a few that were unopened here that you can tell were found later. Also, I won't go over all of these because these ones here we went over in our Batman the Animated Series toy review, so no need to review these. For those who saw that video, here is the Superman that was part of the same series that I had talked about. This is Tim Daly's Superman from the animated series. Plastic head, stuffed body. And here is Kyle Rayner's Green Lantern in the form of a 12-inch action figure.
He was the Green Lantern of the Superman animated series, but not of the Justice League. He was in one episode of Justice League Unlimited.
Yep. Now here are some of the action figures that I had from the 90s. Here you've got Tim Drake and Nightwing, and you'll notice that they are both comic book version rather than the TV show version. And this is Batman. Again, also Justice League of America version, which is much different from the others. At the time, I did not realize that I had a Tim Drake Robin action figure because I did not read the 90s comics back then. And I did not know that this was pre-Blue and Black Nightwing. From Legends of the Dark Knight was the official name of the action figure line for him. Here is Han Solo from Star Wars, the Power of the Force collection.
Was 1996 is what the box set's on it.
This was part of the Star Wars line of action figures. This is an interesting one because DC's company released a larger line of action figures to go with Batman Legends of the Dark Knight, and all of the figures were about 8 inches tall as opposed to our usual 5 to 6 inch figurines. This is Bane from the series. As a young kid, I had Penguin, Joker, Bane, and Mr. Freeze, all from the same series, which Mr. Freeze did feature a spider body in this line.
Okay, here are some toys you would have had from DuckTales. We did a whole video going into more detail on this on our DuckTales Retro, and I'm going to briefly touch over that. So these are the applause set of Huey, Dewey, Louie, and Webby, along with my custom Bubba that my mom made for me, Tootsie puppet, which was actually Sarah from Land Before Time, and the Scrooge McDuck from the Disney store. And here are some 90s Pokemon toys. We've got Dragonair, Eevee with the first generation's evolutions, Flareon, Vaporeon, and Jolteon, Charmander and Vulpix. These Charmander and Vulpix here are actually from Japan. I got them at the Sanrio store way back when. And I don't know if you can see it, but on Vulpix's tail, it's hard to see, but it actually has Japanese writing on it, kanji. And this was very different from the Vulpix we had here. Charmander, also very different. Front design, a little easier to see the back there, but yeah, these came in very different packages from them. We also have a Blastoise that we found at one of our first or second WonderCon.
Yeah, one of those. I think it might have been our first.
This is Rant and Robin's Blasty.
Yep, it was my first Blastoise. I've since gotten a Mega Blastoise too. But
and it is also
a squeak toy.
And if anybody remembers kids' meals, they might remember going to KFC and getting a Pokemon plush. We found this at a comic book store, and this is the Vulpix from the set. I believe you could get Zubat, Seal, Vulpix, and one other, I think, but I can't remember which one.
Now, as a collector, it's interesting to note that this one has a very high value. We tend to not buy collectibles over about like $20 or $30 for something like this. I believe we paid $25. We went on eBay later that day, and it was being sold for somewhere around $100, I think, or more.
I believe so.
He is a very rare. I don't think the store over there, it was Fat Collectibles down in Anaheim. I don't think they fully knew what they had. But still,
yeah,
it's really
here's
cool.
the detail of the tail where it was all one piece, and then they did stitching to indicate the different tails on that one. Also in the 90s, Coca-Cola had a mascot of a polar bear, and they were everywhere. So this was my collection, and it started in 1994 with this one way back here who was on clearance and lost his bottle, but they're still very recognizable. My two twins, and my big ones, and the small beanie-like ones. And I even had a walrus. I had trading cards too, but they're put away right now.
What would the 90s be without some of the greatest comics that came through different publishers? Most people think of DC and Marvel, but here are some epic comic finds that come from Walt Disney. These are the 4 books that compiled a well-known series in the early 90s called The Life and Times of Scrooge McDuck. And the popularity of DuckTales contributed much to the popularity of the solo Uncle Scrooge comics. But people were asking for some sort of backstory behind how Scrooge got his riches. So Don Rosa got down and wrote this. We'll talk more about that in another future video that's coming pretty soon. So for now, we're just showing you these and their 4 covers, and then some related books in just a second.
Yeah.
The 90s also featured some of the greatest comics via Disney Adventures magazine and various other things. Here we have some compilation of Bone, which was a comic usually printed in color in the Disney magazine.
Sometimes it was black and white still. I used to read it. This is where I got my start on Bone.
This was a complete compilation of the Bone story told in that line, published more recently. And then also we have the Life and Times of Scrooge McDuck Companion. We'll talk more about those in an upcoming video. But, short to say, these books have gained a lot of value because of how rare they are in print. But luckily, you'll find out in our next new video next week that you can still find this story. As a lover of the 90s, I am happy to announce that DC has started republishing some of their great 90s titles, including Batman Nightfall, and then the lead-ins to No Man's Land, Batman Cataclysm, and Contagion, along with the hard-to-find Legacy, which we also own that one too, as it is a rare, hard-to-find one. But we also have Legacy. This Legacy is worth upwards of about $300, but has, as of late, has been reprinted. The one here in this video is an original print, though, of the trade paperback from Titan Comics, which is DC's counterpart over in the UK. We also have the No Man's Land Saga 2, which has been reprinted in its entirety. Originally 5 volumes, it was reprinted as 4 volumes. I don't know what the 3rd recent printing has done with it. As was the case with a lot of TV shows, we even got a comic book to go alongside with the Batman Adventures. This one has been talked about in another video, which we will link in the description. But here is the Batman Adventures comics. And again, we are happy to announce that DC has reprinted the Batman Adventures in its entirety and is working into the 2nd volume on Batman and Robin Adventures, but as far as we know, they plan to keep going with it. Here are some of the original 90s solo Robin trade paperbacks. We have pretty much the whole series, but these are the only ones that are actual 90s trade paperbacks. Again, these are different ones. Flying Solo went alongside Nightfall, and Robin, A Hero Reborn was his origin story, featuring some of the 3 detective comics, followed by about 3 other comics. You can see the animation there.
Spoiler!
We also had Nightwing issues in that time period too. Nightwing's solo series had not reached the main series, which didn't start till the late 90s, early 2000s. But he did have a series when he first had his long hair, when he had his black and blue suit.
With the long hair.
Yes.
And this is a reprint here. This is volume 2 of the reprint. They're reprinting the Chuck Dixon run, which is the 90s Robin run. This is Triumphant, which contains the Cry of the Huntress in here. Find it. and Tragedy and Triumph from the original 90s, which was what, Joker's Wild?
Yep, which we also have the original trade paperback of that, but we have stored it away for the most part because we don't necessarily need to have both in our bookcase, but we do have the original because of the value.
It's nice to note that they are doing the entire run of Chuck Dixon's Robin. We showed you a lot of the individual comics from it earlier, and this is where Spoiler resides in comic book form from the 90s, and she was one of my favorite characters. If any of you had watched Teen Titans on Cartoon Network, you might have also tuned in to Young Justice from their DC hour that they had. Sadly was canceled way too premature, but they are bringing it back on DC's streaming when they get that up and running on DC's website. This is the Young Justice. They just barely reprinted this. This was August when we found this. This is a series I wanted to pick up ever since I saw Teen Titans and the show. This was this was Tim Drake Robin with Impulse and Superboy, along with Wonder Girl 2, Secret, and then Arrowlet are the main characters of this one. And this would have been when we had the Justice League, and then the Teen Titans had grown up to be Titans.
I was super excited when this was announced. I did not want to read Superman comics, but this was the only story of Superman that I wanted to read. It was the main story arc from the 90s called The Death and Return of Superman. As is the case, DC put this together. It has a sleeve on the outside, and of course is composed of full color 1,000 worth of pages of the story of Superman in its entirety. For those of you who don't know much about him, he was replaced by alternative Superman that showed up for a while, my favorite being this one, Cyborg Superman. But overall, this story arc was a dragging story arc, and this is probably one of the few omnibuses that DC designed well. For those of you who like omnibuses, I warn against buying DC's omnibuses as they don't bind them very well, but this is one of a few that are bound up pretty well. The 90s was one of the only times that two competing comic book companies got together. Now there have, over the years, to clarify, been several Marvel and DC crossover stories, but the 90s was the epic time where both companies wrote off on the license for them. This is the only official Marvel DC story. It features two worlds coming together. You have fights between Namor and Aquaman, and various other characters. I can't quite find it, but Robin fell in love with Jubilee of the X-Men. There it is. And Batman and Superman and Hulk fight, which is where we got the rumors of a Superman Hulk movie, which unfortunately probably will never happen. And we even got a Batman Captain America fight. For those of you who wonder who would be stronger, ultimately we never find out, because it's an evenly matched fight between the two of them until they both decide that they don't want to fight for a higher being's pleasure, because they are both the detective type character, although Batman is made to appear slightly smarter than Steve Rogers.
Okay, here is Spider-Girl. This was a what-if story that developed into a series. This was an idea that Peter Parker and Mary Jane had a daughter. She was nicknamed Mayday Parker, and she developed an X gene that was her spider powers. And she went on to become the Spider-Girl. Oh.
And then you have basically an effort to discredit McFarlane. I'm sure Marvel would not admit it now. But basically, in the 90s, Marvel decided to introduce the idea that the Spider-Man that we had in the main comics was a clone. And that this character, Ben Reilly, was in fact Peter Parker. In protest, basically, of the fans' protest to this story arc, made Marvel change direction on it, and decided that no, Ben Reilly is in fact the clone, and Peter Parker is the original. But for a while, we got to see Scarlet Spider swing around New York. And again, this was basically in an effort to discredit McFarlane, because it would have rendered Todd McFarlane's comics to have been obsolete. Because when the clone first showed up, according to the backstory in this, would have been right before McFarlane's run, and this would have been just after. So this would have discredited McFarlane, who Marvel was mad at because he had gone off to create Spawn and those other comics because Marvel wouldn't let him kill. Alright, so in the 90s, we were first introduced to a character in the Marvel Universe by the name of Deadpool. At the time that Fabian Nicieza created Deadpool, we did not have the comedy aspect that we came to recognize, and some of the line artwork was it was good, but it was definitely a different style. He was definitely more skinny, and again, he was not silly by any stretch of the mind. He was more serious. It wasn't until one of his later runs that he became more of the comedy character that we know nowadays. Really, that was the work of Joe Kelly, who took the Deadpool that was more the serious assassin and created a really good comic for him. It was really good when Marvel decided to republish this in omnibus form, because as a Deadpool fan of more of the classic Deadpool, Joe Kelly is one of my favorite Deadpool authors by far, because he brought a more cartoony, wacky feel to the Merc with a Mouth. And he is the same reason that I have carried on liking the Marvel now and the current lineup of Deadpool, because I feel like Marvel, despite the movie, has gone back to his roots of being more humorous. The movie in and of itself was an interesting portrayal of Deadpool, but again, just not my favorite. As a fan of 90s TV shows and movies, it's nice to know that companies have finally gotten together and put our DVD series, our series on DVD in different forms. Although Spider-Man remains one of the hardest to find, and Family Matters was not super well received, and as a result is only an Amazon distribution now. But it's still nice that we can get our hands on all of our 90s shows that we loved watching, and of course the 90s Batman movies, as corny as they were.
Have an ice day.
Although George Clooney will never be Batman.
We don't talk about that credit card.
Yep. But make sure you pick some of these up, because they're very, very well done. And there are some nice bonus features on some of them.